I went into the office to to speak to her. She allowed me into her office. So I sat down in front of her and I said, I've got to tell you that I've been arrested for rape and there's an ongoing investigation. She was looking down at her desk, and when she heard that, she looked up, smiled at me and said, "It won't go anywhere, Karl," with a smile on her face. And I was completely surprised by her response. I said, "Why is that, Ruth?" She said, "Because it's been made in the context of a marital breakdown." And she said, "Women do things like this all the time." And she said, "Some of the things women do in divorce makes me ashamed to be a woman." My name's Karl, and 4 years ago I applied for divorce from my wife. Then we was living in the same house still while the divorce was going through. I got the impression she didn't really want the divorce, but she tried to sort of maintain that she did. We got to the stage where the decree nisi was issued, that arrived. Shortly after that, we had an argument and my wife called the police. I thought nothing of it. I was out at the time. I'd left to go to the shop after the argument with our daughter. She texted me and told me she'd called the police, and so I thought nothing of it. I thought it was just another. She's done it a few times before. Called the police after an argument. I got back from the shops with the shopping with my daughter. The police car outside the house. So I entered the house, quite happily, as I'd done before. With the police had been called, and I thought worst case scenario, I'll have to leave the home for 24 hours, which is their policy, which I knew because it happened before. I was due to start a night shift shortly after that, so I thought, well, that's not a problem. I'll get my stuff and go to work. It was a Sunday, late afternoon. Anyway, I entered the house. The police called me into the kitchen. I put the shopping bags in the kitchen. An officer came into the house, spoke to me briefly. I can't remember exactly what he said, but he said, "You're under arrest for rape." Got his handcuffs out and put them on me. I've never been so shocked in all my life. The shock nearly killed me. I remember afterwards thinking, if I was older or had a heart condition, that could have been the end of me, because the shock and the disbelief. They put me in the car. I was like, I've got to go to work, and they were taking the notice of it. You plead kind of to thinking that they're going to know the truth, but obviously they're only doing their jobs. They arrested me, said, "Look, this is what's going to happen to you. You'll be put in the police cell for a while, you'll be interviewed, and then probably bailed to another address." And that happened. That was October 2015. The police interview basically was them just turning up, took me into the interview room, told me what happened. And then their first question to me was, "Tell us about your marriage, Karl." So I told them, my wife's suffered a back issue. She'd got addicted to opiates and moved her up and down, and I couldn't live anymore, so I applied for divorce, and I'm getting out of the marriage. And that's, she moved her up and down, which meant that sometimes she was aggressive, called the police, things like that. So I decided to end the marriage, even though it was a long-term marriage. We was financially comfortable. I had a good job. We had a lovely little daughter, a lovely house. But I just couldn't take the mood swings and the aggression and the police coming to our door and things like that. I explained all that to them, and it took 10 minutes to explain that, and they said they put the allegation to me. They said then they said to each other, "I've got no more questions, and have you got any more questions?" They said no, and that was it. The interview was over for 10 minutes. I expected to grow throughout the night because it was such a serious allegation. And it was 10 minutes, they sat their arm folded and asked any more questions, and they just let me go and told me I have to go and live somewhere else because you've got another address. They allowed me to make a phone call to arrange another place to stay. My wife wouldn't let me see our daughter. She was then just turned 6. And I started a court battle to gain access to her because we were really close. I think a lot of that's to do with the mum, the moods and the drugs, and the head weren't in a good place. She wasn't really that close to the little girl, and I kind of compensated for that. I paid her a lot of attention and things, and did a lot with her, took her a lot of places and stuff. And then she stopped me seeing her. I had to fight it to the courts, which wouldn't have any of it. They wouldn't let me near the child while the allegation was live. And they just said, I went back a few times, they just kept saying they're going to wait for the outcome of the police investigation, which took 13 months. I did speak to the officers. I demanded to speak to them and find out what was going on. You know, how come this is taking so long? You know, I want to be charged so I can get to court and prove my innocence, or I want to just be let go. And the times I spoke to them, they tell me things like, you know, we've got sympathy for you, we understand, but it's just the way it is, this is how it's going to be, these things take ages, we've got loads of allegations like this, since the reforms to legal aid, we're stacked out with this kind of stuff. One of the things that I know they did investigate was the family court file. They got that across because any other court applications are brought in and sort of scrutinised. I did tell them that on her affidavit for the family court, the dates of the alleged offences were basically way different to the allegations that she's making to the police. I mean, she told the police it was 12 months, August to August. Nice clean 12 months he's been doing this. The family court, she told him I'd been here for 20 years, and the police had noticed that, and so that you know that they had looked into it, and I think that they were noticing that the whole thing's just a charade, and they knew why it was. The other thing I need to say is that my ex-wife at the time had no job, no money. There was a massive amount of equity in the house. We had a then 6-year-old daughter. She had a drug addiction. I think that was her only option, really, because otherwise she couldn't have afforded a solicitor for the divorce. There was no legal aid for divorce solicitors. It just been stopped. So that was her only option in getting legal representation that she wouldn't have to pay for. I think the police saw that, and it just looked like what it was. And plus we had a nice home. She was looking at losing it. She's going to lose her home. She might have lost her daughter because of her drug habit. She was looking at losing everything, and she was blaming me in a weird sort of way. And not only does the legal aid box get ticked by making the allegation, also the revenge box gets ticked as well, doesn't it? And I can't stand the sight of him anymore. I want you out of the house. That box gets ticked. Loads of boxes got ticked, and she became the victim, which I think she wanted to be, and was more comfortable. Even though I was divorcing her, she then immediately became the victim. There was thoughts of suicide, here and there along the way, because of sheer despair that I couldn't get access to my daughter. The courts weren't listening, and I was made homeless. All my things were still in my home. I wasn't allowed near the house, and there's that kind of despair that you're just living out of a suitcase in someone else's spare room, and all you've done is want to get out of a bad marriage. That was my only crime, if you can call that a crime, and I thought that was the right thing to do. I could have stayed and argued and carried on with her, but I just wanted peace and quiet, and I told the police this in the interview. And I'm going through all this now, just because I wanted a divorce, which it's not an unusual thing to divorce somebody. I got I answered bail 13 months later, and they told me there's no further action. And then it must have been 15 months before I saw my daughter, but the mother insisted it was in a contact centre for some reason. So I had about 6 weekly appearances in a contact centre to see my daughter. And she'd asked me why I hadn't seen her for 15 months, and I think she must have thought it was something I chose to do, but I ignored. She asked me twice and I just sort of changed the subject. I didn't really want to say anything or why or explain anything to her. Anyway, eventually we got sort of out, the contact rolled out to overnight contact, and I ended up winning 3 days per fortnight, plus alternate Mondays, picking her up and collecting her from school. Yeah, I was thinking, I had a sort of relationship with the divorce solicitor. She knew my circumstances and situation and why I was divorcing my wife, obviously because she, did all the sort of groundwork for me. And I thought I'd better go and tell her what had happened. Thoughts went through my mind as I was going towards the office. I was driving towards her office. It's a serious allegation. What if she decides she can't represent me because of the allegation, and maybe there's a policy of the company, or maybe she just isn't going to feel comfortable with me and wants to, pass me to somebody else or something like that. Another thought went through my mind where she might call for a chaperone to come into the room with her. I thought that might happen. Anyway, I went into the office to ask to speak to her. She allowed me into her office. So I sat down in front of her and I said, I've got to tell you that I've been arrested for rape and there's an ongoing investigation. She was looking down at her desk, and when she heard that, she looked up, smiled at me and said, "It won't go anywhere, Karl," with a smile on her face. And I was completely surprised by her response. I said, "Why is that, Ruth?" She said, "Because it's been made in the context of a marital breakdown." And she said, "Women do things like this all the time." And she said, "Some of the things women do in divorce makes me ashamed to be a woman." And with that, I felt much better. And I thought, she believes me, because she obviously sees this sort of thing all the time. And it just made me feel a lot better that she just smiled, and all my worst fears didn't materialise, I suppose. And that was the start of then putting that with the fact that the police didn't really seem interested in asking me any questions during the interview. The divorce solicitor didn't seem bothered about it, and she just seemed like this is routine stuff. I then started to develop, I started feeling a bit better about the allegation, as if to think I'm just in some sort of dirty fight. That's what it just felt like. This is just a dirty fight where my wife is doing what she can and needs to do to get where she needs to be. It's supposed to be against the law now, isn't it? I mean, women are allowed to do such terrible things to men. In an era where we're supposed to be stamping out domestic abuse, women are being empowered to do it. Yeah. I mean, where's the penalties? If you say that you don't want your ex to see the children because of X, Y, and Z, and it's found that there's nothing there, where's the penalties? Well, you lied. Where's the penalties? There's no evidence of this, And why, if that's the case, why did you allow him to grow up with these 2 children beforehand? And why has he always been allowed to feed and bath this one? And now all of a sudden, because you're divorcing, he's this and he's that, and he shouldn't be allowed near her. Why all of a sudden? That question don't get asked. You know what I mean?